The truck rattled up the mountain road just before dawn, and Corporal Elena Reyes sat in the back with her rifle case across her knees, and her eyes on the passing darkness outside. She had her gear, her orders, and the kind of calm that only comes from spending years learning how not to need anyone's approval. She was 26 years old and had qualified as a sniper on her first attempt, a score that put her in the top 3% of her program's history. She knew this not because she talked about it, but because she had read it in her own file before it was sealed. What the file said first, however, before her scores and her times and her commendations, was 4 words that seemed to follow her into every new assignment like a shadow. First woman to complete. The truck stopped. Someone banged twice on the side panel. She climbed out. The forward operating base sat on a high ridge overlooking a wide valley. It was cold in the way that mountains are always cold before the sun comes up, sharp and honest, cutting straight through fabric. 3 soldiers stood near the entrance watching her. One of them said something to another in a low voice, and the other one laughed. She had learned a long time ago not to look for the joke. She already knew what it was. Sergeant Briggs met her at the equipment tent. He was a broad man in his late 30s, with a face like weathered stone, and the kind of eyes that measured things without ever quite deciding. He looked at her case, then at her, then back at the case. "Reyes," he said. "Sergeant, your file says you're good." "My file is accurate," she said. He almost smiled. She could see it briefly cross his face before it was gone. "Get your kit sorted. Briefing at 00-600. She found her bunk, stored her equipment with the same care she always did, and sat for a moment in the quiet. From the other side of the thin partition, she could hear voices she didn't yet know the names for. One of them drifted through clearly enough. Who gave her a rifle? There was laughter. She pulled her maintenance cloth from her bag and began cleaning her scope. The first week was cold in more ways than one. She wasn't ignored exactly. The squad was professional enough to work with her, but she was kept at a distance, the way people keep something at a distance, when they're not sure whether to trust it. Questions were answered briefly. Conversations stopped when she walked past. She ate her meals and attended her briefings, and spent 2 hours each evening at the range when the others had gone inside. She was calibrating. The valley below the ridge had a specific wind pattern. The air came from the northwest in the mornings, and shifted south-southwest by midday, then picked up again from the east as the temperature dropped at night. She logged every observation in a small notebook. She adjusted for the altitude, for the humidity readings, for the particular weight of the ammunition they were using. She was building a picture of the environment, the way a painter builds a scene, carefully, layer by layer. Private Okafor noticed. He was the youngest in the unit, no more than 22, with an easy smile and the kind of curiosity that hadn't been worn down by too many years of routine. He started showing up at the range during her evening sessions, not to shoot, just to watch. She didn't mind. He had the rare quality of being present without being intrusive. "You write everything down," he said one evening. "I do." "Why?" "You can't see the target at this range anyway." "I'm not shooting at the target," she said, making a note in her book. "I'm shooting at the conditions. The target is just where the bullet ends up." He thought about that for a moment. That's a strange way to put it. "It works." He nodded slowly, watching her adjust the turret on her scope. "For what it's worth," he said, "I don't think it matters who gave you the rifle." She looked at him for the first time that evening. "It doesn't matter to me either," she said. "I'm the one using it." He smiled at that, and she almost smiled back. Lafruz. The intelligence came in on a Tuesday, late afternoon. A high-value target. A logistics coordinator responsible for resupply chains that had been fueling operations in the region, had been tracked moving through the valley below. The window was narrow, and the situation was fluid. The target was traveling in a vehicle that intelligence expected to stop near a particular road junction at a specific time the following morning. The junction was visible from the ridge, just barely. Sergeant Briggs spread the map on the table, and the squad gathered around it. He traced the distance with his finger, and then looked at the number that the intelligence officer put in front of him. 1,840 meters. The room went quiet. Their senior sniper, Corporal Vasquez, had been dealing with a knee injury for 4 days. He could walk, but lying prone in cold ground for hours wasn't possible in his current condition. He looked at the number and shook his head slowly. At this altitude, with the valley wind, he started. I know, Briggs said. That's not a standard engagement distance. I know that too. Everyone in the room knew what the next question was. No one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Briggs looked at the map for a long moment. Then, without looking up, he said, Reyes. She was standing at the back of the group. Sergeant. Talk to me about that distance. She stepped forward and looked at the map. She had, in fact, already studied this section of the valley during her evening logging sessions. She had shot at a marker she'd placed at 1,000 meters on the range below the ridge. She had not shot at 1,840. No one could, on a standard range. But she had the data that told her what she needed to know. It's manageable, she said. The silence that followed was thick. Someone near the back of the room shifted their weight. Manageable, Briggs repeated. The morning wind in that valley comes from the northwest. Consistent speed, around 12 to 14 kilometers per hour, until about 8 o'clock when it shifts. We'd need to shoot before that shift. At this altitude, the bullet will travel approximately 1.8 seconds to reach the target. I'd need to account for wind drift, bullet drop, and a small Coriolis correction given the distance. She paused. I've been logging the valley conditions for 6 days. I have what I need. Another silence. Briggs looked at Vasquez, who gave a small, honest shrug. It's not the distance I'd question, Vasquez said quietly. Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You'll be in position by 0400. Okafor spots for you. She nodded. Yes, Sergeant. She was already calculating. Look, she did not sleep much that night, but not from nerves. She lay on her back in the dark and ran through the numbers the way a musician runs through a piece of music before a performance. Not searching for mistakes, just making sure everything was where it was supposed to be. Wind correction, elevation hold, breathing pattern, trigger pressure. She thought about the men in the squad, not about their doubt, which was already a small and irrelevant thing in her mind, but about what it meant to be one of them, out here, with a job to do. She thought about Okafor, who asked good questions and listened to the answers. She thought about Briggs, who had not been kind to her, but had given her the shot when it mattered, which was a different kind of respect, maybe the more honest kind. She was not here to prove anything to anyone. She understood that now, if she had ever doubted it. She was here because she was the best available option, and in the morning she would either be right about that or wrong, and the valley conditions cared about neither possibility. At 3:30, she got up, dressed quietly, and prepared her rifle. Luck. The position they chose was a natural depression in the rock face near the ridge's eastern edge. She settled in long before first light, feeling the cold of the ground through her clothing, letting her body adjust to it. Okafor lay beside her with the spotting scope, his breath barely visible in the dark air. They didn't speak much. He gave her wind readings every 10 minutes. She adjusted her notes accordingly. The valley below was a pale gray shape in the early light, the road a darker line running through it. The junction was a small, specific point in her scope. She had dialed it in during the setup, and now it sat there quietly, waiting. At 6:17, the vehicle appeared. Contact, Okafor said softly. Moving east along the road. Speed is slow. It's going to stop. She steadied her breathing. She had already made her final calculations. Wind was running at 13 kilometers per hour from the northwest, right in the middle of her logged average. Temperature was 2 degrees above what she had predicted, which was close enough to make no significant difference. She made one small final adjustment to her elevation turret. The vehicle slowed. Stopping, Okafor said. She found her anchor points. Cheek to stock, right hand loose on the grip, left hand steady beneath the rifle. She took one long breath and let it out slowly. The target stepped out of the vehicle. She did not think about the shot. She simply made it. The rifle spoke once. And then there was the silence. The one that always follows. The one that seems longer than it actually is. 1.8 seconds, she had calculated. 1.8 seconds for the bullet to cross the valley, to drop and drift and correct across nearly 2 kilometers of mountain air. Okafor had his eye to the spotting scope. He was completely still. Then, hit. Confirmed hit. She exhaled. She worked the bolt and stayed in position, as training required, scanning for secondary movement. Her heartbeat was steady. Her hands were steady. Below, the vehicle was already retreating in the confusion, which meant the mission had accomplished what it needed to accomplish. Okafor lowered the spotting scope and looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, in a very quiet voice, he said, "That was 1,840 meters. "Yes," she said. "In crosswind. 13 kilometers per hour. He shook his head slowly, not in disbelief but in the way people shake their heads when something real and extraordinary has just happened in front of them. "Elena," he said, using her first name for the first time. "That was something else." She began logging the shot in her notebook. Luff, they were back at the base by mid-morning. Word travels fast in a small unit. By the time they walked through the gate, people already knew. Not the full details, but enough. She could feel it in the way the air around her was different. Not warmer exactly, but changed. People made eye contact when they passed her. Someone held a door. The debrief was brief and factual. Briggs ran through the sequence of events, confirmed the intelligence outcome, noted the distance and conditions for the record. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. 1,840 meters. Confirmed. Hit. Mission objective achieved. Afterward, when the others had filed out, he stopped her. "Reyes." "Sergeant." He looked at her with those measuring eyes, the same ones that had studied her rifle case on the first day, and he gave a single, slow nod. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a speech. But she understood what it meant, because she had learned long ago to read the language that men like Briggs spoke, the one that lived beneath the words. It meant, "You were right, and I was wrong to doubt." She nodded back and walked out into the pale mountain sunlight. That evening, a soldier caught up with her near the equipment tent. His name was Garland, the one whose voice had carried across the partition on her first night. He was younger than he acted, she now realized, and he had the look of someone who had been carrying something uncomfortable for several hours and was finally setting it down. "Reyes," he said, "I want to say something." She waited. "That first day, the thing I said," he looked down briefly, then back up. "It was stupid, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry." She studied him for a moment. He meant it. She could see that he meant it, and there was nothing in her that wanted to make it harder than it needed to be. "Apology accepted," she said simply. He looked surprised, as though he had expected something more difficult. "That's it?" "That's it," she said. "We have work to do." He nodded, and she thought she saw something ease in his expression, some tension she hadn't put there, but had apparently been responsible for removing. He walked off, and she turned back to what she had been doing. Lafayette, that night, she sat alone outside the equipment tent, her rifle disassembled in her lap, cleaning each component with the same quiet attention she always brought to the task. The valley was a dark shape below the ridge, invisible but present, the wind coming off it cool and familiar now. She heard footsteps and looked up. Okafor dropped down onto the ground nearby and leaned his back against the wall, not saying anything, just settling in the way that people settle when they feel easy in a place. He pulled out a notebook of his own, something he was writing, letters home maybe, and began to write. They sat like that for a long time without speaking, which was its own kind of conversation. The mountain wind moved across the ridge. The stars were very clear. She worked the cleaning cloth along the barrel and thought about nothing in particular. There was nothing that needed to be thought about. The shot had been made. The numbers had been right. The notebook had served its purpose. Tomorrow there would be a new set of conditions to log, a new section of ground to read, a new set of calculations to make. That was the work. That was the whole of it. She had never needed the question answered. She had always known who gave her the rifle. She had,